Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the massive space station grow larger on the main screen. The ethereal Coalition station was bigger than any human city. Towers of crystal and metal twisted together in impossible shapes that hurt his eyes to look at. Lights of every color danced across its surface, like living rainbows. Lisa Parks sat at her communications station and checked the translation systems for the 10th time in an hour. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her fingers moved quickly over the controls. She had spent 3 years learning the basic languages of the Coalition species, but she still worried about making mistakes. Amy Stone paced behind them with a data pad in her hands. The xenobiologist had read every file they had on Coalition biology, but there was so much they did not know. She stopped walking and looked at the station again. In a few hours she would meet aliens that humans had only dreamed about. Jake adjusted his dress uniform and tried to calm his nerves. This was the most important day in human history. The Coalition had agreed to meet with humanity after receiving their first radio signals 5 years ago. If this went well, humans could join the galaxy-spanning alliance. If it went badly, humanity might be banned from ever leaving their solar system again. The communication system crackled to life, and a musical voice filled the bridge. Lisa quickly worked to translate the words that appeared on her screen. The voice belonged to someone called Commander Lirelay, Starweaver, from the Silvari Dominion. She was giving them permission to dock and welcomed them to Coalition space. Jake thanked her and guided the ship toward the docking bay. The bay was enormous and could have held 100 human ships. Strange vessels of all shapes and sizes floated inside. Some looked like living creatures, while others were perfect geometric shapes that seemed to bend space around them. As they docked, Jake felt his heart beating faster. He had commanded ships in dangerous situations before, but this was different. The future of his entire species rested on what happened in the next few days. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Jake led his small team into the station. The gravity felt normal, but the air tasted different. It was cleaner somehow and carried scents that reminded him of flowers and electricity at the same time. The corridor beyond was wide enough for 20 people to walk side by side. The walls were made of some kind of living metal that shifted color as they passed. Soft music played from everywhere and nowhere, filling the space with gentle harmonies. They followed signs, written in dozens of languages, toward the main reception hall. Other beings walked through the corridors and Jake tried not to stare. He saw creatures that looked like walking trees with faces made of bark and leaves. Others resembled giant insects with rainbow-colored shells. Some floated through the air, without any visible means of support. The reception hall was massive with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. At the center was a raised platform where 2 figures waited for them. Jake took a deep breath and walked forward with his team. The first figure was tall and elegant, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow with its own light. She had pointed ears and silver hair that moved like it was underwater, even though there was no breeze. Her eyes were the color of deep space, and when she smiled, Jake felt like he was looking at a living work of art. This had to be Commander Lirelay Starweaver. The second figure was shorter and covered in what looked like living crystal. The crystal changed colors as Jake watched, shifting from blue to green to purple. Her face was humanoid, but her skin had a metallic quality that reflected the lights around them. When she moved, the crystals made soft chiming sounds like wind bells. Lirelay stepped forward and spoke in a voice like singing water. Lisa quickly translated her words of welcome and introduction. The crystal being was Dr. Zara Vex from the Vexian Republic, and she was one of the Coalition. Most brilliant scientists. Jake introduced his team and tried to remember all the diplomatic protocols they had studied. He bowed at the right times and used the formal greetings that Lisa had taught him. Everything seemed to be going well. Then Lirelay gestured toward a table covered with various items. She explained through Lisa that these were traditional gifts and refreshments from different Coalition worlds. She hoped the humans would try them as a sign of friendship and trust. Jake looked at the table and saw foods and drinks of every imaginable color and shape. Some of the items moved on their own, while others glowed with inner light. Amy stepped forward with her scanner to check if anything might be harmful to human biology. Most of the items registered as safe, though some showed unusual energy readings. Amy pointed out several drinks that appeared to be safe, and Jake selected a cup filled with golden liquid that sparkled like liquid starlight. The drink smelled wonderful like honey and fresh rain. Jake raised the cup in a toast to new friendships and took a large swallow. The liquid was sweet and warm as it went down, and he felt a pleasant tingling sensation spread through his body. Lirelei smiled and took a drink from her own cup. Dr. Zara. Vex made what might have been an approving sound as her crystal skin shifted to a warm gold color. Jake felt proud that he was handling his first alien drink so well. The tingling sensation grew stronger, and Jake began to feel very relaxed. His usual nervousness about formal events faded away, and he found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Lirelei was asking about human exploration and their reasons for seeking contact with the Coalition. Jake found himself speaking more freely than usual. He talked about humanity's drive to explore and their curiosity about other forms of life. He described Earth and human culture with enthusiasm and passion that surprised even himself. Lirelei listened with obvious interest, and her skin grew brighter as he spoke. She said that she was impressed by human determination and their willingness to travel so far just to make contact. Most species waited for the Coalition to find them rather than actively seeking them out. The golden drink was affecting Jake more than he realized. His words came easier, and his normal diplomatic caution was completely gone. When Lirelei praised human courage and resilience, something inside him responded before his brain could stop it. The words came out of his mouth before he could think about them. He looked directly at Lirelei, with her glowing skin and beautiful alien features, and said, "I really like you." The effect was immediate and devastating. The entire reception hall fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped, and hundreds of alien eyes turned to stare at the small human delegation. Lirelei's skin went from soft blue to blazing gold, so bright that Jake had to squint. Dr. Zara Vex's crystal body flashed through every color Jake had ever seen before, settling on a deep purple that somehow conveyed shock and alarm. Other aliens in the hall began making sounds that the translation system could not interpret. Lisa's face went white as she frantically worked at her controls, trying to understand what had just happened. Amy stepped closer to Jake, as if to protect him from whatever alien custom he had just violated. Jake stood frozen in place with the empty cup still in his hand. The golden drink had made him feel confident and friendly, but now reality was crashing back. He had clearly done something terribly wrong, but he had no idea what. Lirelei was staring at him with an expression he could not read. Her glowing skin continued to pulse with that bright golden light, and she seemed to be having trouble breathing. Other Sovari in the hall had similar reactions, and some were backing away, as if Jake had just announced he was carrying a dangerous disease. Dr. Zara Vex stepped between Jake and Lirelei and began speaking rapidly in a language that sounded like crystal bells ringing. Lisa's translation system was struggling to keep up, but Jake caught words like protocol and unprecedented and genetic compatibility. The crowd around them grew larger as more aliens stopped to watch the drama unfold. Jake could feel the weight of their attention and knew that whatever he had done had serious consequences. His simple attempt at a friendly compliment had somehow become a major diplomatic incident. Lisa finally got her translation system working properly, and the color drained from her face as she read the results. She looked at Jake with an expression of pure horror and whispered that they needed to talk immediately, but it was too late for private conversations. The damage was already done, and Jake could see Coalition security forces moving through the crowd toward them. Whatever he had started with those 3 simple words was about to change everything. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him away from the crowd of staring aliens. Her translation device was working overtime as dozens of different species began talking at once. The sounds filled the reception hall like a symphony of confusion, and Alarm. Amy followed close behind them, with her scanner still in hand. She was trying to take readings of the various aliens around them, but her equipment was having trouble processing so many different biological signatures at the same time. They found a quiet corner behind a large sculpture that looked like frozen lightning. Lisa activated a privacy field generator and turned to face Jake with panic in her eyes. Her hands shook as she held up her translation device. "Jake, you have no idea what you just did," she said, in a voice barely above a whisper. The translation came back as a formal mating proposal. In Sylvari culture, saying you like someone is the same as asking them to have children with you. Jake felt his knees go weak, and he had to grab the sculpture for support. The frozen lightning was warm under his fingers and pulsed with a gentle energy that did nothing to calm his racing heart. He looked back toward where Lirelei was still surrounded by other Sylvari, all of them glowing like golden stars. Amy checked her datapad and shook her head. "According to my research, Sylvari reproduction is incredibly complex. It's not just biological, it's tied to their energy fields and their emotional states. They can't just decide to have offspring casually like humans can." Through the privacy field, they could see coalition security forces setting up a perimeter around the reception area. The guards wore armor that seemed to be made of living shadow, and their faces were hidden behind masks that shifted like smoke. They were not threatening, but their presence made it clear that this situation was being taken very seriously. Lisa continued reading from her translation device. "It gets worse. Sylvari mating contracts are legally binding across the entire coalition. If Lirelei accepts your proposal, it becomes a formal agreement that both governments have to honor. If she rejects it, it's considered a grave insult that could end diplomatic relations." Jake watched as more aliens gathered around Lirelei. Some appeared to be offering advice, while others seemed to be arguing about something. Dr. Zara Vex was still there, her crystal body now a steady deep blue that somehow conveyed serious concentration. "What was in that drink?" Jake asked as he tried to think clearly through the remaining effects of the golden liquid. His head felt fuzzy, and his normal caution was still dampened by whatever alien substance he had consumed. Amy ran another scan and frowned at the results. "It's some kind of truth serum mixed with a mood enhancer. It's designed to make people feel comfortable and speak honestly during first meetings. Most coalition species have natural resistance to it, but human biology is different. It affected you much more strongly than it was supposed to." The crowd around Lirelei was growing larger, and Jake could see that news of the incident was spreading throughout the station. Aliens of every description were arriving to witness what might be the first interspecies mating proposal in coalition history. A new group of beings entered the reception hall, and the crowd immediately made way for them. These were clearly important officials, dressed in robes that seemed to be cut from pieces of space itself. Stars twinkled in the fabric, and nebulae swirled across the surface, in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lisa translation device identified them as members of the Coalition Council. At their head was an elderly Sylvari, whose skin had the pale glow of ancient starlight. Her hair was white as fresh snow, and her eyes held the depth of centuries. This was Alina Moonwhisper, the most senior member of the Sylvari government. Alina approached Lirelei, and they began speaking in low voices. Other council members surrounded them, and Jake could see that this had become a formal government consultation. His innocent compliment had escalated into a diplomatic crisis of the highest level. Dr. Zaravex detached herself from the group and walked toward the humans. Her crystal body was now cycling through colors that the translation system interpreted as curiosity mixed with concern. She stopped just outside their privacy field and waited for permission to enter. Amy deactivated the field, and Zara stepped inside. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes playing a complex melody. Lisa Device translated her words into precise scientific language. "I have been studying your species' biological and cultural data," she said. "Human emotional expression is far more casual than ours. You use words of affection freely, without the legal implications that other species attach to them. This appears to be a case of cultural misunderstanding rather than deliberate proposal." Jake felt a surge of hope, but it faded quickly as Zara continued speaking. "Unfortunately, the Coalition legal system does not recognize cultural differences as grounds for nullifying formal declarations. The words were spoken publicly and witnessed by hundreds of beings. Under our law, this constitutes a valid proposal regardless of intent." Amy leaned forward with interest, despite the seriousness of the situation. "How does Sylvari reproduction actually work?" she asked. "If we understand the biology, we might be able to find a solution." Zara's crystal body shifted to a warm yellow that indicated willingness to share knowledge. "Sylvari reproduction requires both emotional and energy compatibility. The partners must achieve perfect harmony of mind, body, and spirit before offspring can be conceived. It is not merely biological, but mystical." She paused and her colors shifted to something that looked like scientific fascination. "Your species appears to reproduce through purely physical means, with emotional attachment being optional, rather than required. This fundamental difference makes interspecies offspring theoretically impossible, which should void the proposal." Lisa looked up from her device with excitement. "Then we can explain that it's impossible, and the whole thing goes away," she said. But Zara's colors shifted to a dark red that clearly meant negative. "The impossibility of offspring does not invalidate the proposal itself. Sylvari often enter into non-reproductive partnerships for emotional and spiritual reasons. The legal obligations remain the same, through the privacy field." They could see that the council was reaching some kind of decision. Alina Moonwhisper was speaking with great authority while other members listened with obvious respect. Lirelei stood silent in the center of the group, her golden glow now steady and controlled. Jake felt responsible for the chaos he had created, but he also found himself thinking about Lirelei in ways that went beyond diplomatic necessity. Even in the midst of this crisis, she maintained her dignity and grace. Her alien beauty was undeniable, but there was something more, something in the way. She had listened to his stories about Earth that suggested genuine interest. Amy was still questioning. Zara about coalition law and biology. "Is there any way to withdraw a proposal?" she asked. Zara's crystal body cycled through several colors before settling on orange. "The proposer can withdraw their offer, but only if the recipient gives permission. However, withdrawal after public declaration is considered highly shameful and often results in permanent social exclusion." Lisa checked her translation device as new information came in from the council discussion. "They are calling for an emergency session," she reported. "The full coalition council will convene to decide how to handle this unprecedented situation." Jake realized that his mistake was affecting far more than just his own mission. The entire coalition government was being disrupted because of 3 words he had spoken under the influence of alien alcohol. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. Alina Moonwhisper detached herself from the group and walked toward them with the fluid grace of someone who had lived for centuries. Her starlight skin gave her an otherworldly beauty that reminded Jake why humans had always been fascinated by the idea of elves. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of ages. "Captain Morrison," she said, through Lisa Translator, "you have created a situation that has never occurred in coalition history. The proposal you have made requires serious consideration under our most sacred laws." Jake tried to find words that would fix the situation, but Alina continued before he could speak. "Commander Starweaver is honor-bound to consider your proposal seriously. During this consideration period, you will remain under protective custody to ensure that no outside influences affect her decision." Amy stepped forward with her scanner raised. "What kind of protective custody?" she asked. Alina smiled with genuine warmth that made her ancient features beautiful. Nothing harmful. Captain Morrison will be housed in quarters appropriate to his status as a potential mate. He will be free to move about designated areas, and will have opportunities to speak with Commander Starweaver, so that she may properly evaluate his suitability. Lisa translation device was struggling with some of the formal language, but the meaning was clear. Jake was essentially under house arrest until Lirelei decided whether to accept or reject his accidental proposal. The implications were staggering. If she accepted, he would be bound by alien law to honor a commitment he never intended to make. If she rejected him, it could end humanity's chance of joining the coalition forever. Jake looked across the hall at Lirelei, who was watching him with an expression he could not read. Her golden glow had faded to a soft blue, and she seemed to be studying him with the same curiosity. He felt toward her. Whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. Jake. Quarters were more luxurious than anything he had ever seen. The walls were made of the same living metal as the corridors, but here they responded to his emotions. When he felt anxious, they glowed with calming blue light. When he was curious, they showed him images of distant stars and alien worlds. The furniture seemed to grow from the floor itself and adjusted to his body perfectly. A window that might have been a portal, or might have been a screen, showed him views of space that changed based on his interests. Right now it displayed Earth hanging like a blue jewel against the darkness. Lisa and Uni were allowed to visit him daily, to discuss the situation and plan their next moves. They brought him reports from the Coalition Council sessions, which were becoming more heated as different species debated the implications of interspecies relationships. On his third day in protective custody, Lirelei came to visit him alone. She moved with the fluid grace that seemed natural to her people, and her skin glowed with soft silver light that indicated calm contemplation. When she spoke, her voice was like music, but Jake could hear uncertainty beneath the melody. "I wanted to speak with you privately," she said, as she settled into a chair that formed itself around her elegant frame. "The formal consideration period allows for personal interaction so that I may judge your character and compatibility." Jake felt nervous but also excited to finally talk with her without crowds of diplomats and scientists watching their every move. He had been thinking about her constantly since the incident, and not just because of the legal implications of their situation. "I need to apologize for what happened," he said. "I had no idea that my words would create such problems for you and your people. If I could take them back, I would." Lirelei tilted her head in a gesture that was both alien and somehow familiar. Her silver hair caught the light as it moved, and Jake found himself captivated by the way it seemed to float around her shoulders. "Would you truly take them back?" she asked. "Do you regret expressing your feelings even if the method was inappropriate?" The question caught Jake off guard because he realized he was not sure of the answer. His attraction to Lirelei had grown stronger during his confinement. He found himself thinking about her intelligence and grace and the way she had listened to his stories about human culture with genuine interest. "I regret the confusion and trouble I caused," he said carefully. "But I cannot regret the honesty of the feeling behind the words." Lirelei's skin brightened to a warm gold, and Jake began to understand that her color changes were like human facial expressions. Gold seemed to indicate pleasure or approval, while blue suggested calm and silver meant thoughtfulness. She stood and walked to the window that showed Earth. For several minutes, she studied his home world in silence, while Jake waited for her to speak. When she finally turned back to him, her expression was serious. "My people live for many centuries," she said. "We are careful with our emotions because we know that hasty decisions can affect us for lifetimes. Most of us never experience the kind of immediate attraction that your species seems to take for granted." Jake joined her at the window and they stood side by side looking at Earth together. He could smell something like starlight and winter air. That seemed to be her natural scent. "Tell me about your world," she said. Not the official reports that your diplomats provided, but your personal experience of it. Jake found himself describing Earth in ways he had never put into words before. He talked about summer storms and autumn leaves, and the smell of ocean air after rain. He described human cities with their chaotic energy and human art, with its emotional intensity. Lirile listened with complete attention and asked questions that showed she understood the deeper meaning behind his words. She seemed particularly interested in human concepts of family and the way relationships formed and evolved over time. Your species bonds so easily, she observed. You form attachments quickly and deeply without the formal structures that govern our interactions. This must create great joy, but also great pain. Jake nodded and found himself sharing more personal details than he had intended. He told her about relationships he had lost and the loneliness of command that came with being responsible for so many lives. He talked about his dreams of exploring the galaxy and making contact with other intelligent species. As he spoke, Lirile, colors shifted through warm golds and soft blues. Her eyes never left his face, and he had the sense that she was seeing parts of him that he rarely showed to anyone. Meanwhile, in another part of the station, Amy was working closely with Dr. Zara Vex to understand coalition biology and law. They spent hours in Zara laboratories studying genetic samples and energy patterns from dozens of different species. Amy found Zara fascinating in ways that went beyond scientific curiosity. The Dexian approach to research was methodical and precise, but Amy could see flashes of creativity and intuition that reminded her of the best human scientists she had known. Zara's crystal body had been shifting to warmer colors during their work sessions. Amy had learned that Dexians normally maintained cool blues and greens that indicated logical thinking. The warmer yellows and oranges that Zara displayed suggested emotional engagement that was unusual for her species. Your research methods are quite different from ours, Zara observed as they analyzed genetic compatibility data. You rely heavily on intuition and emotional reasoning, while we prefer pure logic. Amy looked up from her microscope and smiled. The best discoveries come from combining both approaches, she said. Logic gives us the framework, but intuition helps us see patterns that pure analysis might miss. Zara crystal skin flickered through several colors that Amy was beginning to recognize as confusion mixed with interest. I have been experiencing sensations that my training did not prepare me for, she said carefully. Working with you has been intellectually stimulating in ways that feel different from normal scientific collaboration. Amy felt her heart speed up as she realized what Zara was trying to express. She had been feeling a similar attraction, but had assumed it was one-sided. The idea that a brilliant alien scientist might return her interest was both thrilling and terrifying. I understand, she said softly. I have been feeling something similar. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at each other across the laboratory equipment. Amy could see her own reflection in Zara Crystal's surface, and was struck by how different they were, and yet how natural this connection felt. Lisa spent her time monitoring coalition communication networks and trying to understand the political implications of Jake's situation. She discovered that the emergency council sessions had attracted attention from across the galaxy, and representatives from dozens of species were arriving to observe the proceedings. Some species supported the idea of more flexible relationship laws, while others argued that changing ancient customs would destabilize coalition society. The debate was becoming about much more than Jake and Lirile. It was about the future of emotional freedom in their civilization. She brought regular reports to Jake during their authorized visits. The conservative faction is being led by someone called Counselor Marcus Kane, she told him. Apparently he is human, or at least he was originally. Jake looked surprised. Another human? How is that possible? We were told that we are the first to make contact. Lisa checked her notes. According to my sources, he was part of an earlier colony ship that left Earth before faster-than-light communication was developed. His ship was found by the Coalition decades ago, but by then he had already adapted to their ways and chosen to stay. The revelation that there was already a human in Coalition government was disturbing for several reasons. If Kane opposed Jake's proposal, it would carry extra weight coming from someone who understood human culture. More importantly, it suggested that humanity, first contact, was not as unprecedented as they had believed. Back in his quarters, Jake continued his conversations with Lirelei. Each visit brought them closer together, and he began to see past her alien appearance to the intelligent and curious person beneath. She told him stories of Sylvari history and culture, while he shared human legends and poetry. They discovered that despite their biological differences, they had similar ideas about honor, courage, and the importance of exploration. "What troubles me most," she said during one of their evening talks, "is not the legal implications of your proposal, but the practical ones. Even if we were to form a genuine partnership, how could it work? Our species are too different." Jake had been thinking about the same question. Physical compatibility was obviously impossible, but he found himself caring more about intellectual and emotional connection. Lirelei mind fascinated him in ways that went beyond her exotic beauty. "Maybe compatibility is not about being the same," he suggested. "Maybe it is about complementing each other and learning from our differences." Lirelei's skin glowed with warm gold as she considered his words. "In all my years," she said, "I have never met anyone who challenged my thinking the way you do. Your human perspective is so different from ours that it forces me to question assumptions I never knew I had." As their deadline approached, Jake realized that his feelings for Lirelei had grown far beyond the casual attraction he had expressed while under the influence of alien alcohol. Whether or not they could build a real relationship across the barriers of biology and culture, he knew that she had changed him in fundamental ways. The question now was whether she felt the same way and whether they would be allowed to explore that connection, or whether the weight of law and politics would force them apart before they could discover what was possible between them. The Coalition Council chamber was vast beyond imagination, with seats arranged in concentric circles that seemed to extend upward into infinity. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the space, creating a symphony of colors, sounds, and energy patterns that overwhelmed human senses. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, on a platform that slowly rotated so that he could address all sections of the assembly. Lisa and Amy flanked him, providing translation support and moral encouragement. His dress uniform felt inadequate in the presence of so much alien majesty. Alina Moonwhisper presided over the session from a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal. Her ancient voice carried clearly through the chamber, despite the acoustics that should have made it impossible. "The formal consideration period has ended," she announced. "Commander Starweaver has reached her decision regarding Captain Morrison's proposal. However, before that decision is revealed, the proposer has requested permission to address this assembly." A murmur ran through the crowd as representatives discussed this unexpected development. Many species had formal rules about proposal protocols, and Jake's request was apparently unusual enough to require debate. Lirelei sat in the section reserved for Sylvari nobility, wearing robes that seemed to be woven from liquid starlight. Her skin maintained a steady silver glow that Jake had learned meant deep contemplation. She had not spoken to him since their last private conversation, and he had no idea what decision she had reached. Dr. Zara Vex occupied a place of honor among the Dexian delegation. Her crystal body cycled through subdued colors that indicated professional interest mixed with personal concern. Amy kept glancing in her direction, and Jake could see that their relationship had deepened during the crisis. The debate about Jake's request continued for what felt like hours. Different species had different customs regarding formal speeches, and some argued that allowing him to speak would set a dangerous precedent. Others contended that denying him would violate principles of justice and fair hearing. Finally, Alina called for silence and announced that Jake would be permitted to address the assembly. The platform stopped rotating and faced the main section where the most senior representatives sat. Jake felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes and knew that his next words might determine the fate of human galactic relations. He had planned this speech carefully with input from Lisa and Amy, but now that the moment had arrived, he decided to abandon the formal diplomatic language they had prepared. Instead, he would speak from his heart the way he had with Lirelei during their private conversations. Honored representatives, he began, and his voice carried clearly through the chamber translation systems. I stand before you, not as a diplomat or military officer, but as a representative of everything that makes humanity unique in this galaxy. He paused and looked directly at Lirelei, whose silver glow brightened slightly at his words. When I spoke the words that created this situation, I was under the influence of substances that lowered my normal caution. It would be easy to claim that my proposal was invalid because of this influence. Your legal experts have provided me with precedents that would allow such a nullification. The chamber remained silent as representatives waited to hear what choice he would make. But I will not take that path, Jake continued. While my words were clumsy and my understanding incomplete, the feeling behind them was genuine. During the consideration period, I have come to know Commander Starweaver as an individual, and my respect and affection for her have only grown stronger. Their skin shifted to a warm gold that was visible even from Jake's position in the center of the chamber. Other Sylvari representatives showed similar color changes that suggested approval or surprise. However, Jake said, raising his voice slightly, I believe that love and partnership should be chosen freely, not bound by law or obligation. The most precious gift one being can give another is the freedom to choose their own path, without coercion or pressure. A new murmur ran through the assembly as representatives realized that Jake was taking a position that challenged fundamental coalition law. I propose that Commander Starweaver be released from any obligation to consider my proposal under your formal legal structure, he continued. If she chooses to explore a relationship with me, it should be because she wants to, not because ancient laws require her to do so. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Some sections of the assembly erupted in approval, while others showed clear disapproval. Jake could see that his words had divided the representatives along lines that probably reflected ongoing political tensions within the coalition. Alina Moonwhisper called for order, and the chamber gradually quieted. When she spoke, her ancient voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. Captain Morrison, she said, you are asking us to overturn laws that have governed interspecies relations for millennia. Such changes cannot be made lightly or quickly. From the conservative section of the assembly, a new voice rose in opposition. The speaker was humanoid, but something about his posture and bearing seemed wrong. When the translation systems identified him, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Counselor Marcus Kane had once been human, but decades among the coalition had changed him in ways that went beyond physical adaptation. His skin had a metallic sheen, and his eyes reflected light like mirrors. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of someone who had abandoned emotion in favor of logic. This human seeks to undermine the very foundations of our civilization, he declared. The laws that govern formal relationships exist to prevent exactly the kind of chaos that emotional bonding creates. We have seen what happens when species rely on feelings rather than structure. Kane gestured toward Jake with obvious contempt. Humanity is too young and too chaotic to understand the wisdom of our ways. They would drag us back to the primitive, emotional confusion that most species have evolved beyond. The conservative representatives responded with approval, while the progressive sections showed signs of disagreement. Jake realized that his situation had become a focal point for much larger political conflicts within the coalition. Amy stepped forward from her position beside Jake and activated her own translation system. Her scientific training gave her words additional authority as she addressed the assembly. I have spent the past week studying coalition biology and social structures, she said. My research indicates that species with stronger emotional bonds show greater creativity, innovation, and resilience. The human approach to relationships is not primitive. It is actually an evolutionary advantage. She gestured toward the datapad in her hands. Species that suppress emotional connections in favor of pure logic show declining birth rates, reduced artistic output, and increased susceptibility to depression and other mental health issues. Dr. Zara Vex rose from her seat among the Vexian delegation. Her crystal body was cycling through colors that Jake had never seen before as she struggled with some internal conflict. I must support Dr. Stone's conclusions, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber. My own recent experiences have shown me that emotional engagement enhances, rather than diminishes, scientific thinking. The Vexian suppression of feelings may be limiting our potential, rather than protecting it. The admission sent shockwaves through the Vexian section, and Jake could see that Zara had just taken an enormous personal and professional risk by publicly contradicting her. Species Fundamental Philosophy. Lisa activated her own translation system and addressed the assembly with the authority of someone who had spent years studying coalition languages and cultures. The translation errors that created this crisis reveal a deeper problem, she said. Our species communicate past each other because we assume that our ways of expressing emotion and commitment are universal. True understanding requires accepting that different approaches to relationships can coexist. She looked directly at Kane as she continued. Forcing all species to follow the same emotional and relationship patterns is not unity, it is uniformity. The coalition's strength comes from diversity, not conformity. Kane's response was swift and harsh. Emotional chaos leads to conflict and war, he declared. The human approach to relationships will destabilize everything. We have built over centuries of careful progress. But Jake was ready for this argument. He stepped forward, and his voice carried new confidence as he addressed the assembly. Respected Counselor Kane, you speak of chaos, but I see opportunity, he said. Yes, human emotions are intense and sometimes unpredictable. But those same emotions drive us to explore beyond our limits, to sacrifice for others, and to create beauty that transcends logic. He gestured toward Lirile, whose golden glow was now bright enough to illuminate her entire section of the assembly. The feeling that brought me here was not chaos, it was wonder. Wonder at the possibility of connection across the vast distances that separate our species. Wonder at the chance to learn from minds so different from our own that they expand our understanding of what it means to be alive. The chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed his words. Jake could see that the debate had moved beyond legal technicalities too. Fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and connection. Alina Moon whisper rose from her crystal throne, and her ancient voice carried the weight of centuries. As she addressed the assembly, we have heard arguments for both tradition and change, she said. The time has come for Commander Starweaver to reveal her decision, and for this assembly to determine how that decision will affect our laws going forward. All eyes turned to Lirile as she stood gracefully from her seat. Her starlight robes caught the chamber lighting, and her skin blazed with golden light that seemed to fill the entire space around her. When she spoke, her musical voice carried clearly through the vast chamber, and Jake felt his heart stop as he waited to learn his fate and the fate of human galactic relations. Lirule's voice filled the vast council chamber with musical tones that needed no translation. Her words carried emotion and meaning that transcended the barriers between species, and Jake felt his heart racing as she began to speak. Honored representatives, she said as her golden glow intensified, I have spent these past days learning about a species whose approach to life challenges everything I thought I understood about relationships and connection. She looked directly at Jake, and her silver hair seemed to float around her shoulders like liquid starlight. Captain Morrison, words were spoken carelessly, but the person behind those words has shown me depths of feeling and commitment that I have never encountered before. The chamber remained completely silent, as hundreds of alien representatives waited to hear her decision. Even Kane had stopped his usual protests and was listening with obvious tension. However, Lirelay continued, I cannot accept his proposal under the current legal framework, because doing so would make our connection a matter of obligation rather than choice. Love, that is mandated by law, is not love at all. It is merely contract. Jake felt his heart sink even as he admired her courage. She was rejecting his proposal, but doing so in a way that challenged the entire coalition legal system. Her words were echoing his own arguments about the importance of free choice in relationships. But Lirelay was not finished speaking. Her skin brightened to an even more intense gold as she addressed the assembly with growing passion. I call upon this council to reform our ancient laws, she declared. The regulations that govern formal relationships were created in an age when different species rarely interacted. They serve no useful purpose in our modern interconnected galaxy. Elena Munisper leaned forward on her crystal throne with obvious interest. Other representatives began talking among themselves as they realized that Lirelay was proposing fundamental changes to coalition law. I proposed that emotional bonds be recognized alongside legal contracts, Lirelay continued. Let beings choose their partners based on affection and compatibility, rather than political necessity and formal obligation. Let love be a choice, rather than a requirement. The conservative section of the assembly erupted in protests, but the progressive representatives showed clear approval. Jake could see that Lirelay words were resonating with species who had long felt constrained by the rigid relationship laws. Kane rose from his seat with fury written across his metallic features. This emotional chaos will destroy our civilization, he shouted. Stable societies require stable laws, not the whims of temporary feelings. But his words were drowned out by responses from other sections of the assembly. A delegate who appeared to be made of living crystal spoke in harmonious tones that conveyed deep agreement with Lirelay's position. Others added their voices to support the idea of emotional freedom. Dr. Zaravex stood among the Dexian delegation, and her crystal body blazed with colors that Jake had never seen before. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of scientific discovery mixed with personal revelation. I have been conducting research on the effects of emotional suppression versus emotional engagement, she announced. The data clearly shows that species who embrace their feelings demonstrate superior creativity, problem-solving abilities, and psychological health. She looked directly at Amy, who was watching from beside Jake with obvious pride and affection. My own recent experiences have confirmed these findings, she continued. Emotional connections enhance rather than diminish intellectual capacity. The Vexian practice of suppressing feelings has been limiting our potential for generations. The admission sent shockwaves through the Vexian section, but other species began expressing similar thoughts. Representatives who had spent centuries following rigid emotional protocols were suddenly questioning whether those restrictions served any useful purpose. Amy stepped forward and activated her translation system to address the assembly. Her scientific training gave her words additional weight as she spoke to the gathered representatives. Genetic diversity requires cultural diversity, she said. Species that are too similar in their approaches to life and relationships become vulnerable to the same problems and limitations. The human emotional model offers new possibilities for growth and adaptation. Lisa added her own voice to the growing movement for reform. Communication requires understanding that different species express feelings in different ways, she argued. True unity comes from accepting those differences, not from forcing everyone to follow identical patterns. Elena Moonwhisper called for order as the debate continued to grow more intense. When the chamber finally quieted, she spoke with the authority of her ancient position. The arguments we have heard today go to the heart of what the coalition represents, she said. Are we an alliance of diverse species learning from each other, or are we a uniform system that suppresses natural differences in favor of artificial stability? She gestured toward Jake and Lirale, who stood looking at each other across the vast chamber. These two beings have shown us that connection can exist across the greatest possible differences. Their willingness to risk everything for the chance of genuine understanding represents the best of what interspecies cooperation can achieve. Kane made one final attempt to preserve the old system. Emotions are unreliable, he declared. Laws provide security and predictability that feelings cannot match. But Alina's response carried the weight of centuries of experience. Counselor Kane, she said, security without growth is death. The coalition has grown strong because we have learned from our differences, not because we have eliminated them. She rose from her crystal throne, and her ancient voice filled the chamber as she announced the council decision. By majority vote, we hereby recognize emotional bonding as valid basis for interspecies relationships, she declared. Legal contracts will remain available for those who prefer formal structure, but they will no longer be mandatory for beings who choose to connect through affection and mutual respect. The progressive sections of the assembly erupted in celebration, while the conservative representatives showed obvious displeasure. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. His accidental proposal had triggered a fundamental change in galactic law. But the most important moment came when Lirale walked across the chamber toward him. Her starlight robes flowed around her like liquid energy, and her golden glow illuminated everything around her. When she reached him, she spoke in a voice that was meant for him alone, even though it was heard by the entire assembly. Captain Morrison, she said, I choose to explore what is possible between us, not because law requires it, but because my heart desires it. Jake felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized that his clumsy mistake had led to something he had never dared to dream possible. Not just a relationship with an extraordinary being, but a change that would benefit countless others across the galaxy. Amy and Zara found each other in the crowd of celebrating representatives. Their connection had grown beyond scientific collaboration into something deeper, and now they were free to explore it without the constraints of Vexian emotional suppression. Lisa watched the celebrations with satisfaction, knowing that her translation work had helped bridge the gap between species. The communication barriers that had created the initial crisis had ultimately led to better understanding between all coalition members. Alina Moonwhisper approached Jake and Lirale with a smile that made her ancient features beautiful. You have given us all a great gift, she said. The freedom to choose our own paths in matters of the heart. Over the following days, as the New Horizon prepared to continue its mission, Jake reflected on how much had changed since his drunken confession. Lirale had chosen to join his crew as cultural liaison, bringing her knowledge of coalition species to help humanity navigate their new galactic relationships. Zara had also requested transfer to the human ship where she could continue her research on emotional connections while exploring her relationship with Amy. Her decision had inspired other Vexians to question their species' rigid emotional suppression. The story of the accidental proposal spread throughout coalition space, becoming a symbol of how understanding could emerge from misunderstanding. Species that had followed the same relationship laws for centuries began experimenting with new approaches to love and partnership. Jake stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching the stars through the main screen. Lirale joined him there, her presence bringing calm to his thoughts about the responsibilities that lay ahead. Do you ever regret what happened? She asked. Your simple words changed the course of galactic history. Jake thought about the question seriously before answering. The chaos and confusion had been terrifying, but the results had exceeded his wildest hopes. I regret the confusion and embarrassment I caused, he said. But I cannot regret anything that led to this moment. Lirale smiled, and her skin glowed with the warm gold that Jake had learned meant deep happiness. Her alien beauty still took his breath away, but now he also knew the brilliant mind and generous heart that made her truly extraordinary. As the New Horizon jumped too faster than light speed, carrying its mixed crew toward new adventures, Jake realized that his drunken mistake had taught the galaxy something important about the power of choice in matters of love. The coalition would never be the same, and neither would he. Sometimes the most important discoveries came not from careful planning, but from the courage to embrace the unexpected and find connection across the vast differences that separated intelligent beings. In the end, love had indeed conquered bureaucracy, and the galaxy was a better place because of it.